Hello and welcome to the CNBC Africa special. I am Fifi Peters. Today I'm joined by a technology entrepreneur. This is John Collison. Of course, CNBC Africa is the channel for billionaires, and we have got one right in studio with us today. He is also the youngest self-made billionaire in the world. John, thank you so much for your time. I must ask, what is it like to be the youngest self-made billionaire in the world?
Oh dear, I mean, everyone asks that, but honestly, we spent a lot of time focused on building the company. I mean, that's what we focused on 8 years ago when we started on it. And I think things can always look, they get reduced down to a few simple headlines on the outside. But as you can probably imagine, it's still pretty complex running a global business around the world on the inside. And so that's what I spend, 99.5% of my mental energy on.
So the focus in the beginning was never making it big time in terms of the money?
For sure. I don't think most people who start businesses that go on to be successful end up thinking that way, or certainly that wasn't my experience or the experience of a lot of people I know. In our case, we started Stripe because honestly we were so frustrated with how the internet economy worked up to that point and how hard it was for people to start internet businesses. We'd started an internet business before Stripe, and we were shocked to discover that the hardest part was not writing the code or having the idea for the product or reaching customers or anything. That we could all do. It was accepting money for what we'd built from customers all around the world. So that was far too cumbersome, and we said there has to be a better way. I think it helps when you're young and naive and you don't know what you don't know, and that was what we got our start with. And it started small. You get one customer and then two, and you really focus on making them happy, and then 4 and 8, and it keeps scaling up. But we never set out to create a big thing. We set out to create a product that customers like.
I mean, John, for many of us here on the continent who are familiar with a system like PayPal, who are trying to or meeting Stripe for the first time, can you explain to us exactly how Stripe differs from PayPal?
Sure, yeah. So with PayPal, it's very focused on the buyer experience, right? And the little PayPal button that you see from time to time. Stripe, we're almost exclusively focused on the sellers and the people building internet businesses. And so what does that mean? It means a few things. One is, again, if you're starting an internet business you want to sell around the world, I mean, you can't just accept PayPal. Payments is highly cultural, and so you need all sorts of different ways you need to be able to reach people, whether it's credit cards in a lot of Western markets or ETFs in South Africa, WeChat, Alipay, now very popular in China, and so on and so forth. And so it's very different all around the world how you reach people. The second thing we focused on was software developers and making life really, really easy for those software developers who are actually building the business. And I think that's something that PayPal had never really concentrated on. And so there's now 11 million software developers around the world. More and more people, regardless of where they're actually physically located. I mean, we started out in a fairly rural part of Ireland. There's plenty of people here all around the continent. Regardless of where you are, if you know how to code, if you know how to build internet products, that gives you an enormous amount of opportunity. And so focusing on those software developers and the tools they needed. And then 3, really, focusing on making it really easy for people to get started. And so when we started, I mean, PayPal was one option, and that was what some people went with. And oftentimes people went through the banks if they wanted to accept online payments. And gosh, really, I mean, applying to accept internet payments through the banks, it was like applying for a mortgage or something. I mean, it was very, very cumbersome and many, many weeks and things like that. And so we set out from day zero to make it easy for internet businesses to get their start, only a few minutes. And now we actually already serve thousands of entrepreneurs in Africa through our Stripe Atlas program, which goes even earlier than payments. We said, okay, what are the struggles that internet businesses run into before they even get to payments? And we helped businesses incorporate and get access to business banking and things like that. And so that's really the core difference is a focus on accepting money from people around the world, making it easy for developers, and just making it easy to get started.
I mean, talking about the continent, many are wondering what brings an Irish-born entrepreneur who's making it big in Silicon Valley to the continent.
Well, so one thing is, as you probably know, the Obama Foundation is holding their Leaders Africa program, and we're working with them on that. So they've brought together 200 up-and-coming leaders from all across the continent with a focus on government, civil society, and entrepreneurship. And obviously our goals are very aligned, where with Stripe we're focused on internet businesses, and we're now serving millions of internet businesses around the world. And so anything that helps internet entrepreneurs be more successful and gives them a leg up, I mean, it's not only warms our heart, but it's good for the business as well, and it's something we can afford to invest a lot in. And so one thing we're doing is working with them, and we're holding some workshops at the summit, and I'm spending time with the leaders and things like that. More broadly for me, this is a very useful learning opportunity, because we don't have operations here right now, but we are expanding globally. Stripe is headquartered in San Francisco, but we have offices in various parts of Europe, in Dublin, in London, places like that. We have offices in Singapore and Tokyo and Melbourne. And as I mentioned, payments is highly cultural and highly contextual. And so we don't want to be the American company that swaggers in with an American-made solution and says, this is what's right for this specific place. You see totally different phenomena in how people do business across Africa, and different in different parts of Africa compared to what you see in the US. And obviously you've had the rapid emergence of various mobile money schemes, M-Pesa in Kenya, different schemes in different countries, and other such phenomena like that. The economic characteristics are very different. The internet economy only accounts for 1% of Africa's GDP today. We think that's going to be much larger in future. And
over what time frame?
Oh, I think even over in 5 to 10 years, things will look very different, because you see trends like smartphone penetration is growing 50% year over year. It doesn't take that many years of 50% year over year growth for numbers to start becoming pretty big. And so more broadly, this for me is about starting to learn and starting to get some experience and inform our perspective, because I think that's pretty important over the long run.
I mean, you come to South Africa at a very special time for us. As you are well aware, we are celebrating what would have been the 100th birthday of our struggle hero, former President Nelson Mandela, tomorrow, officially, when you will be having your talk alongside another respected African businessman, Aliko Dangote. I imagine you'll be speaking about entrepreneurship as you walk and you breathe the talk. Can you give us insights into some of the messages that you'll be sharing?
Yeah, I'm obviously very excited to be here. Right now I'm actually attending the Mandela Day lecture later this afternoon. Entrepreneurship and how people can get started is something that I'm looking forward to speaking about, and I'm quite passionate about, because I think it's oftentimes the case that growing up, it certainly was the case in Ireland, somewhere like South Africa, various parts, you can feel like an outsider looking in, right? And you can feel like there are all these people who have it, whatever it is, who have it figured out. And the truth is, there's no one recipe, there's no one rule book, and many people actually find their path through somewhat surprising ways. And one of the things we get incredibly excited about is, say, on the continent of Africa, the amount of talent and potential here, potential for entrepreneurship, or potential for people to do great things across many domains. So it's not that I expect to have all the answers for people tomorrow, but more to give people a sense of, 10 years ago I was in Ireland, I was figuring out how all this stuff worked, and you can sort of make it work. Trying to give people a sense of maybe how that could look for them.
I mean, also in terms of the how you started, I think many people would be interested in how it is you got going. Many African entrepreneurs, young people specifically, battle with the access of a capital, citing that as their major challenge. But for you, how did you start? How much did you start with?
Yeah. One of the things that we really had going for us, and that I think is very relevant to probably so many people here, is the fact that we knew how to write software, the fact that we knew how to code, was of great import to getting Stripe off the ground, because that immediately lowers the cost and lowers the barrier to starting an internet business. Because think about it, if you aren't able to write software, if you're starting an internet business, the first thing you do is incur a bunch of bills to fund some software development to get things off the ground. Whereas in the early stage of an internet business, it's all about finding a product that works, right? And you don't have a sense of, you can't put a timeline on it. You can't say it's going to be a month until it works, or it's going to be 6 months until it works. It's a long period of experimenting until you find the product that finally takes off. And so what was useful for us is we were able to build that first version of the product, build the first version of Stripe, and kind of continue doing so. Just the two of us, Patrick, who's my brother I started the company with, for a long time, it was just the two of us working on the product. And so we could keep costs very low until we had a product that was actually showing some meaningful traction. And then we could go out and raise money for investors. And I think that's one lesson for a lot of people here is you're in a very different position when you have something that's working versus when you just have an idea that you're trying to get funding for. And if you can get something working and get it to that, first initial milestone, then you have people much more eager to invest or give you help or something like this.
But John, correct me there if I'm wrong, you essentially started your first business at the age of 16. Mm-hmm. Now at 16, many teenagers were not thinking about starting their own businesses. They were out there having fun. Mm-hmm. When did you and your brother realize that entrepreneurship would be such a big part of who you were, that there was no time to waste but to start at 16?
Well, first I want to disagree with your characterization. For us, having fun was a big part of it, was coding and kind of playing with computers. And so I think different people get drawn to different endeavors. But for us, we were definitely always the nerdy kids, studying, doing math and science Olympiads, and messing with computers from certainly by the time we were teenagers, and so that was the hobby. And I think that was helpful. It wasn't that at a certain point something flipped and we said, okay, we need to start a business and what's required for that. For us, it was a very, progressive evolution, going from playing with computers, playing with hobby projects to, maybe this could actually become a business at a certain point. And again, I think the fact that opportunity is open to so many more people is something that gets me excited, and it's something that I want to help in getting it to as many more people as possible.
And you come from quite an entrepreneurial family. Your parents themselves run businesses themselves. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how coming from a business-oriented family kind of helped you get ahead?
I think there were probably two things that were relevant. One was that both of our parents came from science backgrounds, and so my mum studied microbiology in college, and my dad trained as an electrical engineer. And so I think we were always, as a household, relatively interested in academic pursuits, and that was something that was always valued. And then the second thing, both of our parents at various stages started businesses, and so right after Patrick was born, our mum started a training company that still runs today. Our dad ran a hotel for a while, and there's a lot of there was no notion of entrepreneurship or anything like that, or this seeming special or extraordinary or something like that. It seemed like a pretty normal thing to us growing up, the idea that one might start a business, or this was something that one could do. And so I think it was probably pretty helpful to have that role model.
But then starting a business, there's so much that goes into it, how to write a business plan, the accounting of it, the costs and everything. At 16, when you started, where did you learn business acumen from?
Oh yeah, there's all sorts of stuff that you don't know when you're starting out. But again, I think one of the benefits of being able to experiment with entrepreneurship in the internet domain, and especially if you can get a product working from an early stage, is that you can learn a lot of that stuff on the go. And so the short answer to your question is that we've picked this all up on the fly, and there are some lessons you learn through painful mistakes. You do something once or twice and you get the sense that it's maybe not the best idea or the best use of time. That's one category of lessons. And there's some category of lessons where Stripe is now 1,100 employees around the world. And so part of what's been helpful is that, sure, maybe Patrick and I hadn't done it before, but Stripe is now the collection of an extraordinary amount of talent, many of whom are very experienced in all their domains, be it software engineering or product or marketing or sales or finance or pick your specialty. And so it's been very helpful for us that we've been able to learn from the organization more broadly. I think, again, if a business works, that's one of the privileges you get to learn from it.
And can we talk about mistakes, because the road to success is never smooth as we do here. I mean, what do you class as some of your biggest mistakes, and how is it that you were able to pick yourself up from there and move on and not give up like we've seen many of young entrepreneurs do?
Yeah. So look, obviously we've been very fortunate in that if we had committed any absolutely dreadful mistakes, I probably wouldn't be here I wouldn't be on the show and talking to you. And so we've managed to avoid any of the mistakes that would be company ending or anything like that. That said, for example, one area where people tend to make mistakes early on is around hiring and selecting people, because again, I think the media likes to portray companies, with a focus on the founders, and you need to have, some set of people to spend a lot of time on and to focus on. But if you were to look at the operations of how Stripe works today, it is a function. How successful Stripe is over the next 5 years is more or less a function of the kinds of people we can recruit into the company for the next 5 years, and us selecting the right people. I think in the early stages of running a business, you don't quite know what to look for. You're not trained in how to kind of select and evaluate and interview people, and that's something that you get quite a bit better at over time. It has been my experience, at least. And so we've definitely made mistakes when it comes to hiring the wrong people, hiring people we thought would be effective that turned out not to be, things like that. Luckily, they're not permanent, but that's one area where I think we've learned a whole lot.
John, I've read that you credit the people that you work with as being a big part of the success that Stripe is today. And my question to you is, as a young manager, how did you overcome that challenge of some of the people that you're working with being a lot older than you and asserting the authority as a young person? How did you and your brother deal with that?
Yeah, I think there's a few components to that. First off, I think everyone has to be bought into what the company is doing, and presumably they're only going to join the company if they're excited about the potential and the mission of the company. So we talk at Stripe about increasing the GDP of the internet, making it such that more commerce takes place online than one would have otherwise by providing this infrastructure, the economic infrastructure, the tools that businesses need. And that's not a mission for everyone. Some people want to go work on consumer applications, the next Instagram or the next Snapchat or something like that, and that's great, more power to them. And then some people are really excited about building this underlying layer, the tools and the infrastructure to power businesses and economies. They tend to be the more wonkish, nerdy types, but they get really fired up about that. And so part of it is finding people and finding managers who are personally, deeply very excited about the mission. And again, there are many people at Stripe who say have run their own businesses before coming to Stripe. I think that's no coincidence, because again, they have deeply felt firsthand the need for something like this. That's one. And then the second thing is, I think it comes from some amount of self-awareness around where, for each person in the relationship, what you're good at, what you're not, where your skill sets are complementary, and hopefully your skill sets are somewhat complementary, right? And so in the case of myself and Patrick, we've always had a very clear sense for the product that we wanted to create with Stripe, what we felt was the right direction for it, and the next steps, how we expand it globally such that businesses around the world can use it, things like this. Now, there's plenty of things that go into turning that into a reality that we're not experts in, but hopefully you can find managers where they're excited to work on this product, they defer to you on some things, and then you defer to them extensively on areas of their expertise, and you're collaborating together on this endeavor. And then maybe the last thing is, I don't know really anyone who has been a successful leader or a successful manager over a long period of time without being fairly self-aware and fairly focused on self-improvement. And so I think if you have a thin skin, if you can't take criticism, if you're unwilling to improve, you're not going to last that long, or you're not going to be able to retain people for a significant period of time. And that's one thing that we try to focus on in terms of who we select really as leaders of the company.
So Elon Musk, as South Africans, we definitely like to, own him as our own, given that he was born here in this country. He, when you were starting out, essentially gave you very strong backing. How did it feel like at that time to get the backing from a character so esteemed like Elon Musk?
I mean, it was great, obviously, given that at that stage, I mean, Elon had already been, this was probably 2010 when we raised money from a handful of individuals, and Elon was one of them. And so by that stage, Tesla was successful, SpaceX was successful, PayPal had been successful. He had done so many, he had been successful so many different times. And so I think having that backing and having that vote of confidence was definitely something that we found pretty valuable.
So the most recent headlines regarding Stripe right now is a potential deal or a tie-up or relationship you have with Amazon. Can you give us more?
Yeah, I can't go into too many details, but Amazon is a customer of Stripe, as are many other larger companies like a Booking.com or a Facebook or a Salesforce or something like that. And basically what we've seen is that we started out serving startups, and as you can probably get a sense, we get really excited by startups and entrepreneurship. I'm here, and we're working with the Obama Foundation on the Leaders Africa program, helping promote early stage entrepreneurship and things like that. So we get really excited by startups. But what we've noticed is this infrastructure that we're building, global payments and economic infrastructure, the tools for internet businesses. We started focusing on startups, and over time, more and more larger businesses came knocking on the door and asking could they use it, and there were various, because they realize that they're increasingly competing with startups, right? If they don't adapt from going from the desktop to the mobile world or expanding to more markets or things like this, they are going to be outcompeted by the new entrants that come along. And this is frankly one of the things that's really exciting about the technology space, is that success is fleeting and you have to repeatedly earn it. I think we've seen many technology companies that were very relevant once upon a time, the IBMs and Oracles of the world, that have increasingly faded somewhat from relevance because they haven't necessarily kept up. And so now we work with a very wide spectrum of users, from the smallest startups to the Amazons and Bookings and people like that. And that's something that gets us pretty excited.
John, as a young leader, how important is mentorship and coaching to your career success?
It's been very valuable, and honestly, one of the things that's helpful in Silicon Valley is Patrick and I grew up in Ireland, and then we moved when we started the business out to San Francisco, and there is such a wealth of experience there, and so many people who have seen the kinds of very rare problems, because they are rare problems to have, that when you have a 1,000-person company or running a business around the world and things like this. And so there are very few places in the world where there are such a multitude of people who can maybe help you with that or answer questions. But between investors in the company, people who have helped out and advised the company, and again, most relevantly, like I said, the leaders that we've hired, where in my case, I've been doing this for 8 or 9 years, but you're often hiring people who have 20, 25, 30 years experience. That is phenomenally helpful in you developing and getting that mentorship you need.
Who are your mentors?
Like I said, it's probably 3 broad categories. So some of the early investors in Stripe, and so a fellow called Mike Moritz from Sequoia Capital, which is a venture capital firm that's very successful in Silicon Valley. Actually, one of the other partners there is Roelof Botha, who is a South African and very early at PayPal. And there's been a handful of other lesser known names who invest in Stripe, who similarly have been very helpful. And then just a handful of people we've gotten to know in Silicon Valley. Again, they might not be famous names, but they've very relevant experience for running a company. And then the leaders that we work with, our COO Claire Hughes Johnson, our head of engineering David Singleton, people who've really seen a lot and have very much helped me already.
And John, both you and your brother, Patrick went to MIT, you went to Harvard.
Yeah.
Both you and your brother dropped out at one stage to focus on the business. And it seems like quite a popular story in the technology space of entrepreneurs who don't quite finish schooling who drop out. So my question to you is twofold. Do you drop out because you don't believe in the traditional schooling system? And also, do you think it would be maybe more beneficial for parents who are saving for their kids to go to varsity to rather, when that time comes, give them the money and let them go out and start a business?
It's an interesting question. I wasn't planning on dropping out. I didn't want to drop out. But one of the interesting things about a company like Stripe is in the early days, you get to choose the timing of how things work. But it's sort of like starting to push a rock down a hill. You start pushing it, and after a while it gains its own momentum, and it's choosing the speed. After a little while with Stripe, it was starting to gather momentum, and more and more customers were adopting it. And there's a point at which it has momentum all of its own. And so in the case of Stripe, we started it part-time while we were in university. And then we were really faced with the question, do we want to go full-time on this and really invest in seeing how successful we can make it, or stay in college? And we could do both in the beginning. There was a point where we had to choose. And it felt like too good an opportunity to pass up. It felt like it would have been irresponsible to pass up the opportunity. But that was how it came about. It wasn't, we did not set out intending to drop out of school or anything like that. There was a choice that was presented to us really by the circumstances.
And in terms of parents taking up all the money that they save for their kids to go to varsity, to rather just give it to them and, say, go your way and start your business?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I presume it's very case-by-case dependent.
Sure.
And in particular, I don't think it helps anyone to give someone money to start a bad business or, a business that isn't going to work. And I think one of the things that you see in the startup ecosystem is that lots of companies start and lots of companies go out of business. I think that's good, right? Because you have this selection dynamic where the companies and the products that people find useful end up seeing success and traction, and the companies that don't wither away. And so it's probably somewhat dependent. The parent probably has to evaluate for themselves: is this company any good?
Last question: words of advice for entrepreneurs here on the continent who are looking to make headways in the technology space and start up their businesses. Words of advice for them?
Oh yeah, I think that there'd probably be a few. The first is just that you can do it. And so we have seen all sorts of successful stories on the Stripe Atlas platform. Everyone from StuTurn, a recruitment platform in Nigeria, to Breadfast, an on-demand bread delivery company based out of Cairo, to Sing Commerce, a company in Accra that's providing inventory and order management software for e-commerce businesses. And the interesting thing about Sing Commerce is that 70% of their sales are to the United States. And so they're a company that's headquartered in Accra, but again, they're doing business globally. And I think that's the second lesson, is that if you're thinking about your opportunity as domestic or even regional, you may be thinking about it wrong, because there is now a market of the internet and internet commerce that increasingly is available for entrepreneurs on the continent to tap, and it's an opportunity that's there for the taking.
Well, John, thanks so much for your time. We will leave it there. 30 minutes certainly doesn't feel like a lot of time with John Collison, but of course the business people that we speak with on the channel are asset rich and time poor. He has to go. He is here to do business on the continent, and that is where we will leave it. Thanks so much for tuning in to the CNBC Africa special with technology entrepreneur John Collison. From myself, Fifi Peters, I'll join you at lunchtime for a look at the markets, but it's bye for now.